because we'd been told that he would be born with a cleft, there was that anxiety of, you know, what is my baby going to look like? But I just remember falling in love.
The more we kind of went through the pregnancy, the more determined we were that this wasn't going to be an issue for us at all. And when he was finally born, it just wasn't, you know. Just made us stronger, more strongly attached, didn't it, I guess, if anything.
Yeah. We'll join CLAPA, which is the Cleft Lip and Palate Association, and they have a young people's council where children aged 9 to 18 can support each other through their journey as living with cleft and through different surgeries, and they also raise awareness of cleft throughout the UK.
I started the Children and Young People's Council in about 2012. So Will was one of the first members when I started the council back then, and I remember him coming along to his first meeting.
Yeah, Will was there on the first meeting, I'm pretty sure, and I was obviously very nervous, but Will was kind of quite warm to me, and I remember sitting next to him and chatting to him.
Incredible, he was crazy, but such like a wholesome guy. Like, I honestly never met a guy that was so in touch with his emotions, but so able to express that.
He kind of really stood out to me as a really intelligent young person. You know, he was very young when he joined the council.
It was like having like a big brother that had a cleft, and I was able, it was kind of like my like encyclopedia of cleft knowledge.
It would just be us catching up about what's happening in our lives and talking about his dogs, and I had a dog as well, so we talk about that, and it's just those little conversations that I think humanised him so much more for me.
I think what's really special about the Children and Young People's Council is that the young people have all been born with a cleft, so they all understand what it's like. Also really invited external people in, so we've had clinicians from the NHS and researchers come and talk to the council, and really if they want a group of young people with a cleft to consult on a new study or how they communicate about a piece of surgery or some treatment, that's the group of young people that they've tended to come to.
Before that, I just said that one. Before that one. So things you want to get out of it yourself.
I remember being at school and people would never really understand it, and they'd say, oh, yeah, I bust my lip, and I'm like, no, that's not the same thing. And then it was like going into the CYPC, I actually finally got to meet people that actually did share the same experiences with me.
Everyone kind of having that barrier taken away with having a cleft, like that's not an issue. Whenever you're talking about something, you're not thinking or worrying about how you look or how you're speaking.
And what they often say is they don't have to explain anything, they don't have to explain why they might have a scar on their lip or why their nose might look different or why their speech might be a little bit different, because everybody in that group understands. And also what's been really lovely over the years is because there's quite a wide age range of young people, that the younger ones might be coming up to having a particular surgery, or they might be about to change schools from primary to secondary school. There's older young people who've already been through that and can advise them.
When we headed down to London for Will's first meeting as part of the Young People's Council, we sat on the train and I said, what are you looking forward to the most? And he just said, I just want to meet other people who are like me. So that was important to him. And I think his peers within the Young People's Council gave him strength.
And we found that a lot of young people have gone on to give a talk in school. They might have come back to us as a volunteer once they've left the council, once they get a little bit older. And I think a lot of it is just around not feeling isolated. So being with a group of other young people who have experienced what they've experienced, they get to just be themselves, have fun, and also, you know, really influence things and actually make a difference as well.
His initial involvement with the Young People's Council made him want to raise awareness because that was part of their role. He was really brave and did a presentation to the school when he was 9 about cleft lip and palate, and I think in some ways that was for him to sort of show everybody that, you know, I'm no different to anyone else really. And he held a bake sale and raised £900 for the charity.
And somehow it made it to the local press. And I still remember now, because I don't think I've ever seen a young person's fundraising event have such an impact before. I still remember reading some of the comments from the online news articles and seeing anonymous donations coming in of quite significant amounts because people were so touched by his story. So he did have a way of somehow connecting with people. It was just quite special, I think.
Okay. I think the first time I heard Will mention the words, why did it happen to me? I think it was probably about 13 or 14. All through his, younger years, never once mentioned it, never thought, well, why has it happened to me, So I respected him for that. He had good friends at the previous school, so I think that was difficult for him to leave that behind. And we kept saying, you're going to make new friends, and I think he just struggled. That was one thing he struggled with, and really wanted was close friends, and that kind of shaped the upcoming years for Will.
Will is a very funny person. He would be someone who had a strong sense of humour, and he would always take things not too serious, He would take life just as it came.
Odd taste in foods, as Haley will probably let you know about his taste in foods.
He was a big nerd. I don't really like using that word, but he was a big nerd. He was very funny. He was so kind. Oh, he was just the best.
There were challenges, I think, because he had a cleft, because he wore glasses, because he was a vegetarian. Kids just find any reason to pick on another child.
He did open up about some incidents with being bullied, but sometimes he would make a joke out of it and be like, well, why wouldn't I get bullied? I think he was quite insecure about his lip.
I would never think of him any differently, so I never thought that people would think of him differently. And when I found out, I was quite shocked. It was something so stupid that really hurt him because it was so unfair.
It can feel lonely having a cleft, even though some people might think it's not that major of a thing. Mentally it can be draining.
Will and me were sat with each other and we were talking about bullying, and he'd never really said to me that he was bullied, and it's not something that you kind of just talk about at these meetings. He was like, oh yeah, well in my experience, and I was like, oh, you've been bullied? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, oh, so have I. And I feel like we really bonded on that, and I think it was really the moment that I think we really started to open up with each other.
He was always so nice to everyone, even to people who weren't so nice to him maybe back in the day. Every time, if they came and said hello to him, he would be polite and ask them how they are and stuff, and he would always be nice to them.
He was a little bit open, but he also didn't like to talk about it because that was such a bad time in his life.
He didn't want to remember it.
Yeah.
What he went through, and for the length of time that he went through it, is definitely probably what started other issues like mental health issues, which can really affect, what you kind of choose to do in your decision-making abilities as well.
There was kind of some stuff that I knew so much about him, and then some stuff that he never really mentioned. I'm not sure if he wanted to kind of protect me and not make me kind of fall into similar traps he did.
It's around that time we started to see the happy Will kind of slip away a little bit and started to become a little bit more, withdrawn. That's when, he discovered smoking weed, basically. I mean, let's just be honest about what happened. He came across it, and that became his thing, which he used to be part of a friendship circle.
I think if there wasn't other people there, he would not have done it. Kind of saying, maybe we should try this, maybe we should try that.
I definitely think that the friends that he had were kind of a gateway to that, definitely. They were maybe a bit older as well, so that played a role. Yeah, he probably would have found it by himself, but I think it definitely sped up the process.
When I was quite young, I said to him, have you ever smoked? He said no, and at that point I don't think he had. And then the next meeting, maybe 6 months later, he was like, yeah, I've had one before. And then the next time I spoke to him, it was like, oh yeah, I do cannabis now and again. And then it just kind of gradually got more and more up until him kind of going off the grid for a while.
We saw Will transform from being, he looked a bit, he was lost, he didn't feel like he fitted anywhere, and all of a sudden he had friends, and he was much happier, there's no doubt about it. For him at that time, it was good for him in the sense that it brought him friendships, but of course his dependency snowballed, and it became a big problem for him. And over time, our worst fears kind of came about, really, I guess.
He hadn't changed then. He was still a bit quiet, but then as soon as he smoked or he drank, he was just like another different person. But because we used to hang out in big groups, I can understand going from hanging out with just maybe a few people to then a massive group. It can be quite overwhelming. I think he did it honestly to try and just feel a bit more confident in himself and be able to talk to everyone. We did have many talks saying, like, you really do not need to be smoking that much, and you don't need to do it all the time. We can hang out all together without doing anything, but didn't really end up like that, unfortunately.
I don't think it was necessarily a rush of, oh, this is incredible, I need to do it all the time. I think it's more of a, this makes me feel less terrible, so I'm going to keep doing it. It was going up definitely, and it was a problem, but it wasn't something that I thought could develop too much more, and eventually it did.
You know, most 16-year-old kids, they might, have a drink on a weekend or smoke, and that's all fine, we all go through these stages, but for Will it seemed to be every day, first thing in the morning, last thing on the night. You could see the dependency just gripping him, and as much as we tried to steer him away from that and get him help to help him deal with that and maybe find other ways, we just couldn't break through, could we? We couldn't get the help that he needed.
And he would actually say, I can't do life, it's just too difficult for me. So things were starting to spiral out of control. We had to have a session with a psychiatrist at Bradford Royal Infirmary, and I, before we kind of even got going, I said, can I offer what I think is the root of the problem for Will, the mental health issues, and I raised the fact that we'd moved house when he was 8 and he had to start a new school and he'd struggled to fit in, and I was sat opposite Will as we are now, and I looked, he was crying his eyes out he just broke down as I was talking about all these things, which spoke volumes to me. I just think everything stems back from this transition that just didn't go well for him.
And then he told me that he got a new house in a nearby village to where he was living with his family, and he had just moved out, and he was very happy. Everything was changing for him. He was becoming more independent, and it was really the light at the end of the tunnel that was coming out for him.
And he managed to find somewhere that was really decent, nice little flats.
House.
Okay. He was very quick to tell us it was a house. Everything was turning around for him. He was starting to be optimistic. He'd even told friends he was happy for the first time in a very long time. So this is why it's such a bittersweet ending, really. Things were going so well, and then all of a sudden we have this horrendous turn of events. I felt really, really strongly that something wasn't quite right. And then once we got home from work, I took the car and drove straight over there. And then to find all the lights on in the house, and I was like, okay, it's the afternoon. Something's not quite right. The door was open, so I ran in knowing something wasn't quite right, and then sadly found him in his bedroom, just laid down, fully clothed, just fallen asleep. And then because of the strong potency of what he'd taken, unbeknown to him, he stood no chance. He went to sleep and he didn't wake up.
There was a short period of time where he was doing really well. He wasn't doing anything. He'd moved into the flat, he was fine. But then obviously he had to have something.
I got a message from Ruth, his mum, and as soon as I saw the first few words, I went into shock and my face went pale.
It was just as if everything had kind of just disappeared. Like I was just like, kind of my mind had just gone blank. I didn't know how to feel and didn't know what to say.
It's really hard at such a young age to lose a friend and to lose them when it's so connected to what you've gone through in terms of your cleft and your bullying. It's like that very easily could have been a lot of young people.
I'm sad for us, I'm sad for us as a family, I'm sad for his sisters, Eva and Chloe. And I'm sad for Will that he didn't get to live the life that he could have had.
When somebody passes away, it's so final, there's no second chance. You can't have a debrief, you can't say what went wrong, how did this happen. It's just so final, and you know, until that happens to somebody close to you, it's impossible to grasp.
It has impacted me a lot for the future to really think about my friends and not just ask them how they're doing, but genuinely understand how they are, because you never know how anybody is on the inside, truly. I'd say the one thing I miss about him is just simply being with him and laughing, talking, just conversating. We don't have to do anything, just being together.
What we urgently need is a conversation happening in the UK and locally around the drugs issue. And our levels of drug-related deaths are at a depressing all-time high.
Looking at Will himself, he died very sadly. He was trying to buy pills which he thought were properly dosed, and he wasn't to know, and very sadly, that one of the pills that he bought contained this very dangerous synthetic opioid, one of the nitzazenes, which was the main cause of his death. And you might have heard of fentanyl, which has caused a lot of deaths across the United States. But nitzazenes are a group of opioids which act on a similar part of the brain, but they're 20 times stronger than fentanyl, which is already very much more potent than heroin itself. And without prohibition, those nitzazenes wouldn't even have been invented, they wouldn't exist.
And while you have an unregulated market that has no licensing, no product quality control, with, you know, like the instructions that you get in the paracetamol, what's in it, how to take it, when to take it, so the person that is using that drug knows exactly what's in and how to take it. Unless you have that, unfortunately, we're going to have more tragic deaths.
If you think about prohibition of alcohol in America in the 1920s, nobody sold black market beer, right? They sold whiskey. They made bathtub gin, which turned people blind, right? Why? Because you need a lot of beer to get people drunk, so it's harder to transport, harder to smuggle. You don't need very much whiskey or bathtub gin. It's exactly the same now. You see, the cannabis that people used in the 1970s is not as strong as the cannabis that they use now. It's much stronger. Opium gave way to heroin, which then gave way to fentanyl, which then gave way to what we're seeing now with the nitazene.
The prohibition hasn't worked. We've tried for 50 years to prohibit heroin and cocaine and other drugs, and in that time they've become more dangerous and more people have died accidental deaths. Prohibiting the drugs has brought violence and gangsters into the supply of the drug and made the whole market into a dangerous place.
Full regulation of all drugs, that's like a bit of a mind blow for people. But when I started looking at what they meant by that, it was like, this makes sense. Because, you know, still in contact with people in the police, that since I left, it has just got worse. And there are more drugs available, they're easy to get, they're so cheap.
The war on drugs functions as an arms race, right? The police get smarter, they bust a load of criminals. The criminals only have one option. They get more violent, they get tougher, they get more intimidating so people won't become witnesses. This arms race can only ever ratchet up. In a regular war, you can have a peace treaty, you can de-escalate. The war on drugs, if you look at historically how it has functioned as an arms race. It gets worse and worse and worse. And why does it get worse? Because drugs are illegal, because they are policed in the way that they are policed.
We've been doing this for over 50 years. Surely we need to look at alternatives here. One of the sensible options, and I know it's not easy and it's not going to happen overnight, but is full regulation of all drugs.
Drugs are always going to be there, and they need to be carefully regulated by governments and by the world. In the same way as alcohol and tobacco, we don't ban them, they're both very dangerous, but we regulate them and we make them less harmful than they would otherwise be by careful legal regulation. And we need to do the same thing with all these other psychoactive substances to prevent the harms and prevent the accidental deaths that we've seen. Kofi Annan famously said that drugs have killed many people, but bad drug policies have killed many more. And I think that's correct.
Do you want to go first?
Strong-willed, very strong-willed, very determined.
Very loyal.
Very
a very, very strong sense of fun. I always wanted to please people.
He was very smart, a very smart individual, very intelligent.
Yeah.
Couldn't fault him really, could you?
No.
He always has something funny to say.
Yeah, he was just fantastic. He was so lovely.
Looking back now on photos of Will, when it was my first meeting at the CYPC to the more recent ones of Will, kind of crazy to see how we'd both kind of grown together.
His knowledge of computers and coding was just incredible from such a young age.
What Will went through still has a purpose. His life and his story will have a legacy that can be passed on to young people of like a story of like hope, because his life was getting better. I think that's something that kids nowadays can really hold on to, that it does get better.
I was such a fun, happy, outgoing little kid. Which, you know, over time did change, but yeah, we'll try not to dwell on that so much.
Did you find it? Did you find it? Did you find it? Did you find it?